It's quite hard for us as South Africans to imagine how powerful Elon Musk is today. Here's a guy who was brought up in Pretoria, still carries a South African passport. He went to Pretoria Boys High after being bullied at Bryanston High. Poor Bryanston, they'll never live that one down. And he is now the richest man in the world, transforming numerous industries, a confidant of Donald Trump, despite what the popular press tells you, and a guy who speaks his mind, the way that he sees things. Also, famously, he believes in first principled thinking. In other words, break everything down to its basics and then rebuild it again. Why we're having this conversation is because Dr. Dirk Hermann, who's the chief executive of Solidarity, has been pretty supportive of recent comments from Elon Musk, who, by the way, also, we all know, owns Twitter or X, and has got millions and millions of people who hang on his every word. And he has now really taken to heart the whole BEE story. Dirk issued a press statement this week. We're going to pick up from him why. Well, good to see you, Dirk. Thanks for giving us your time. People who don't know you and don't know Solidarity, just in a nutshell, what is it that you guys are up to?
Well, of course, Solidarity is quite an old institution. We were formed in 1902, so we are part of the South African history for more than 100 years. So we could see what happened. We experience everything. We are influencing history. We are influencing the current political climate. We are influencing the relationship that we have with the United States. And we see it as, with one view, the benefit of South Africa. So we are a trade union, maybe a bit different than the traditional trade unions. We are a free market institution. And one of your main focuses, of course, is to empower people through knowledge. We believe that the route to success, of course, is through knowledge. And that's why we've built a technical college, we built a university, we have a big study fund, we built support schools, etc. So our approach, of course, is a bit different. The whole issue of Black economic empowerment and employment equity, Solidarity is quite involved with, I think, since the beginning of the debate, since 1998, when the Employment Equity Act was accepted since 2001, when the Black Economic Empowerment Act was accepted. And we are very constant through it all. And that is that it is bad for the economy, it's bad for jobs, and we believe that government interference in ownership and specifically also in employment is bad for everyone in South Africa. And that is our constant message from the beginning.
You've been a bit of a voice in the wilderness for much of that time, but it's almost like others are listening now as well. And the support of Elon Musk. Do you know the guy? Have you ever met him?
No, we haven't met him, so we don't know him. And what Elon did was to bring something that's under the surface to the front. And suddenly there's a big debate. It's, of course, not only Elon. There's actually a couple of things that happened in the past, let's say 2 or 3 years, that actually leads to a perfect storm around Black economic empowerment. The first one is the real effect of Black economic empowerment is experienced by ordinary South Africans. And that is why we can see that more and more South Africans across the spectrum rejects the notion of race classification as a basis for policy making. We've seen that also in the recent research of the Institute of Race Relations. So that is in the first place, I think people reject at this stage the policy because they feel the pain, and we can also talk about the cost of Black economic empowerment. In the second place, what we see is the market reject the Black economic empowerment policy more and more. The fact of the matter is that the free market on the long run rejects government interference. And we see this now with Black economic empowerment as well. We see how companies are less willing to implement Black economic empowerment policies. Only 40% of companies in South Africa at this stage comply with Black economic empowerment policies. Less than 50% of South African workers are covered by employment equity plans. So that's the second one. We see that the market rejects at this stage Black economic empowerment. And then there's the third element. And the third element actually brought this whole thing together now, and that is that the international world reject trade barriers. And we see that especially with the United States. Elon Musk articulate that. So it's actually not only Elon Musk, it's three big things: people in South Africa, the market, and the international world. And that lead to tremendous pressure on the current Black economic empowerment program to such a extent that I think it's going to lead way.
It's so interesting the points that you make there, and there's Professor Gumede has also articulated it in very forceful terms. There's a little group of people who are benefiting greatly from BEE. We know that. I recall, and we both of an age where when BEE was brought in, the questions that were being asked were around the idea that, hang on, we should be using what the Indians did, for instance, after 1947, where their empowerment all went into education. The Tata Group, as an example, the Tata family own less than 2% of the company, but most of the income from that business, from their dividends, go into the broader public. But that was outright rejected. Instead, the credo was, we need to bring in Black people into the system and make them part of what we are, so that other Black people can see them and see that the free enterprise system works. Now, it sounds like a bad joke, but people did forcefully agree to that and give away a lot of shareholders' equity during that period. What did you guys do at that point in time?
Well, like you say, at that point in time, we were quite a lone voice because people felt that there's a moral obligation to address inequalities and to address imbalances of the past. And then they say how to do that. And the problem was then that the focus was on output. It was specifically on racial outputs to see how many faces where. And that was the base of employment equity. Employment equity was measured against the outcome. We argued from the beginning that the answer for South Africa lies in input-based programs. Now, input-based programs is training, development, support systems, etc. That is a longer term, but it's the most effective way to empower a country. Input-based programs. The interesting thing is the United Nations Human Development Report, and also CERD, the Committee for the Eradication of All Forms of Racial Discrimination, is quite outspoken about that. The whole idea of input-based empowerment. How on earth can you empower a country on a longer term if 70% of the country's schools are actually dysfunctional? That's a real problem. So we concentrated from the beginning strong on the input-based approach. The interesting thing is, just this week, and I think most people would have read that, the research of the Institute for Racial Relations was published, and the interesting thing is 75% of South Africans say that equality in South Africa, of inequality in South Africa, must be addressed via education and job creation. That's input based. That is how people feel at this stage in South Africa. And there's a very good reason for that. They feel at this stage the pain of Black economic empowerment. We did research on the cost of BEE, and we've published a report on that, and we did it together with the Free Market Foundation. And the cost of BEE is around about 2 to 4% of GDP in South Africa. That's the cost. That amounts to around about 180,000 jobs. So South Africans pay for elite empowerment via 180,000 jobs. And ordinary people feel that. And that is that one element that I referred to that put a tremendous lot of pressure on the South African BEE system.
Okay, so now let's just think of this from a rational person's perspective. I mentioned the Indian option, and that was rejected out of hand. You've mentioned the input, which the rest of the world or most of the world says if you want to empower or you uplift a society, you start in the grassroots. And yet South Africa went a different route. South Africa went for black role models in inverted commas. It went for this enrichment route. How? What happened there? Who made it happen? And who should we be looking back at now and saying, hang on, guys, you got it very, very wrong?
The problem with that specific model was, of course, that everything was through that actually centralized, the whole empowerment project. And the moment that goods and power is centralized, it leads to corruption. So the system was designed for a corruption vehicle. Even the Zondo Commission make reference to that black economic empowerment became a vehicle for empowerment. And the structure of elite empowerment does not lead to models, it leads to corruption. If you look at this stage, that round about 20% of a project, um, you can add around about 20% of any project for BEE cost, and that is to finance the layers of black economic empowerment. But the problem there is it's corruption excluded. The moment that you bring corruption in, it becomes 100 or a 200 or a 300% premium that you pay through corruption. So the structure is designed for corruption. And that is the problem. The moment that it is elite, then it becomes a competition for resources and a competition for tenders to enrich a few individuals.
But why did we allow it to happen? Why did ordinary South Africans not join the dots?
The reason for that is the moral conscious that actually led people to believe that there must be empowerment, and then they got blind. Then they haven't seen the flaws in the system, because the moment that you highlight the flaw, and that is what we've done. But the problem was solidarity, of course, has a specific history. We have a specific color. So everyone said to us, we are racist because we challenge the model, but we did not challenge the morality, the importance to actually create a strong black middle class to address imbalances. That's not what we did. We did not challenge that. We challenged the model that led to empowerment, and people's morality absolutely believe that this is the right thing to do. That led to blindness.
So, when you say you didn't challenge the need to create a strong and growing black middle class, do you support it?
I support that, of course. If we have a strong, of course, black middle class, well, let's call it a strong middle class in South Africa, and of course, if we support a strong middle class in South Africa, the by far majority of those middle class will be black South Africans, then we have a strong economy to the benefit at all. Black economic empowerment at this stage, that's exactly the opposite. It takes economy out of the system. It is bad for jobs. It's bad for employment.
Dirk, I spent 3 years in the UK. Lots of reasons why we were there from 2016 to 2019, but it was quite an eye opener there to come from this racially charged society that we live in South Africa to one where race really doesn't matter. If I came there with a white skin, I spoke the way I spoke, I was a foreigner. I was not part of I wasn't British. That was known. If there was a guy who'd had Nigerian parents and he spoke like the the British did, he was a Brit. And that's the way it is. When do you think here in our country we're going to be able to get to a similar situation where South Africans are no longer obsessed in the way that we have been with race?
Look, my experience at this stage is that the horizontal race relations in South Africa are quite good. Um, and we see that in the workplace, we see that in ordinary interaction among South Africans, the relations are quite good. And again, it's just fresh in our mind. The race relations report that was published this week actually confirmed that and that we experience. If you look, for instance, a very simple thing, by far the majority of South Africans say we don't care about the race of the president of South Africa. That is what the research showed. And we experience that. But the problem that we have in South Africa is not the horizontal race relations, it's the vertical toxic political relations. And that is the moment that we enter into the vertical kind of relations, political relations, then race is used as a proxy for populism. And so I think we are much further down the road of working together as ordinary South Africans than even we believe because of the toxic political debate in South Africa. Again, I just want to say that what Donald Trump, via his executive order, and Elon Musk did was they brought this whole thing to the front again. And they did not do it, especially not the executive order of Trump. They did not do it via political reasons. They did it because of economic reasons. They said that American companies see black economic empowerment as a non tariff trade barrier, and they want to address that. They say that, listen, if you put a tariff on us, a cost on us via black economic empowerment, we will put the tariff on you. So they had a simple, very simple economic reason for the argument, but that led, of course, in South Africa to a lot of political debate.
Dirk, what's your background? I see you are a doctor. Where did you study? Where did you get so wise?
I grew up in the Free State. My dad was later the CEO of Clover South Africa. So I actually grew up in a business world, in a business house, a hardcore free market kind of house. And then I studied at the Potchefstroom University, and I did my master's degree on affirmative action. I did it in industrial sociology. I did it on the influence of affirmative action on alienation or entrenchment. And I did my PhD on the same topic. And then I went to America for internship. And in America, I made contact with a certain guy named Flip Bass. And that was in 1997. And Flip said that, well, he's on his way to the Mine Workers Union. And that was that right wing bankrupt union there in the right wing corner of South Africa. And Flip and I start communicating. And he said to me, oh, why don't you come back to South Africa and help me to build the trade union and into a big movement? And I came back and I started to work at this bankrupt organization, and we built it to a very, very big civil organization with several organizations. So that's a bit my background. So my whole working life was within the trade union environment.
So, does solidarity then go back to the old mine workers union?
Yeah, yeah. We were formed in 1902 as the Transvaal Mine Workers Association. And then your name was changed in 1914 to the Mine Workers Union. And then we've changed your name in 2001 to Solidarity. And then we started to build this movement. And the movement includes at this stage AfriForum, Academia, the University, Saltec, the Technical College, Marula Media, the media company, and Helping Hand, Social Leg, etc. So it's at this stage a big movement. We have around about 600,000 people that pay every month to be part of the movement.
You also have attracted some pretty smart people around you. Are they there because they get really well paid, or is there something else that motivates them?
Now, I think we pay fair. I believe so. But um, but of course, I think anyone can do much better in the private sector. But the people here really believe in a bigger cause, and the bigger cause is to create a future here in the southern tip of Africa. We don't want um, to be refugees in someone else's country. We want to build a country here and live here. So everything that we do, and you will see, is actually something um, that we drive to build a future here in South Africa, even if we are critical about employment equity, if we are critical about black economic empowerment, if we are critical about the ANC or the government. The fact is, we don't like the government, but we love our country. And that is why we built a country.
So you mentioned refugees. What do you feel about the South Africans who've gone to the United States and taken advantage of the refugee option that Donald Trump has introduced?
The fact of the matter is, there's South Africans that went through real trauma in South Africa, especially in the farming communities, people that's attacked on farms in very brutal ways. My own uncle was in a very brutal way murdered on a farm, and people feel we just want to get a way out, and for that I have respect. But we, as the solidarity movement, focus on the 99% of people that will stay here. And we say we respect people if they want to leave, that's okay. Um, one does not understand their specific circumstances. But that is not our solution. Our solution is to get the answer here. And that is why we are in discussions with the United States at this stage on several levels. We are involved in processes where the government is involved as well. We try to get now a solution for a new trade agreement in America. We are quite involved in that, negotiating the circumstances for a trade agreement, because that's the first thing that we must do. There's certain political asks, what they call it asks, of the Americans, the so-called five asks, and we at this stage are quite involved in processes to address the five asks, so that we can come at the place where we can address the more difficult questions about a new trade agreement, of course, and our participation in AGOA. So, so our uh, so to answer your question, thus, is we respect people's choices, but that's not our answer. We work on another level.
You've been at it for a long time. Do you ever get despondent, or did you ever get despondent in the past that the odds were just too overwhelming?
I think the opposite happens at this stage. Of course, we are very, very concerned about the government. We are concerned about the collapse of infrastructure. We are concerned about the role that government at this stage play. But the part that gives us hope is the fact that the private sector and the community sector takes more and more self-responsibility. And the new world of technology makes it possible. Let me just take a very simple example. The In the past, the wisdom would have been that the only way electricity can produce is via a state. It's too expensive. You can't actually produce electricity via the private sector, and definitely not via the community sector. And what happened? New technology came, and new technology brings answers for certain issues that there were no answers for in the past. And suddenly, I, as an ordinary guy that gets every month a salary at the trade union, can build a power station on my roof. The principle that I just want to lay down is that there comes answers beyond the state. And the private sector, more and more, medical care, even roads, even rail infrastructure, education, university, technical college, all of those we can suddenly build via new techniques beyond the state. And that is something that we as South Africans are actually great in. The private sector and the broad community can do that. Um, just this week, we received here a delegation from Europe. And the reason for that is they wanted to come and see how solutions beyond the state can look like. And that is what gives us absolute hope. And I respect the private sector. I respect communities that take self responsibility. And that's not only solidarity and it's not only Afrikaners. We see that on a very broad level. People that say, we take responsibility. And I think it's frustrating for the government that wants to centrally control because the ideology of the ANC is central control. And here comes a community and take self control and and that is why we definitely still have hope for the future. In fact, more and more hope because more and more people take self responsibility. I take, for instance, this whole issue we started with the pressure that the South African community place on the current system will lead to it to fall. There will come alternatives via different proposals that we are also involved in. And that is the power of South Africa. South Africa's power lies in people that take self responsibility.
You know, a guy that I grew up with when we were both lighties in Newcastle, Wayne Duvenage, he went out, and I thought he was being a Don Quixote tilting at windmills when he started with the whole outer story against the ETOLs. But I guess it shows you that eventually the rest of the world catches up with him. I'd really like, though, to get your insight into the whole story around Starlink. It's almost as though there is this sensational invention which can empower people throughout South Africa, and yet vested interests, elites, whoever, somebody's blocking it. Somebody more than those who just dislike Elon Musk. What's your reading of the whole Starlink story here in South Africa?
Starlink can make a tremendous difference, especially in a country like South Africa. Um, we have a big countryside, we have dysfunctional schools. Starlink can make a tremendous difference just in schools. And well, Elon Musk also said he will do that. The problem is if we sit with a bunch of ideologues and the country is managed um, through the ideology of a specific group, and the interest of the country and the poor people in the countryside is not taken in account. The ideology is taken in account. So it's a very strong ideology from driven from an ideological perspective. And in the second place, of course, people want to protect um, specific interests so that they can enrich themselves. So that's the two things: ideology and elite enrichment that drive the process. And it became a political thing. But I think the stalling thing is going to break, open a new phase. And the new phase that's going to be open is equity equivalence. And I think what's going to happen, that that's a solution for Starlink, and that's the solution also for other similar investments of multinationals, is that the qualifying criteria of equivalence is going to fall, and that is going to bring in Starlink in South Africa. So I think it's a matter of time before Starlink come in, and also other multinationals on the with the ticket of equity
For
equivalence.
people who don't understand what that means, just unpack it for us, please. Equity equivalence.
At this stage, if a multinational wants to invest in South Africa, then they must give away ownership. And that is the big debate at this stage. Elon Musk said that, listen, I can do business in South Africa because I'm not black. I must give away 30% of my company, and I don't want to do that. And that is the basis of Donald Trump's argument that it's a trade barrier. You expect as costs. for your company and a 30% giveaway of ownership. That's a barrier. That's a non-tariff barrier, and for that we will punish you with tariffs. So that in broad terms is the argument at this stage. But South Africa has a vehicle to come around that, and that is equity equivalence. The equity equivalence is to a very simple extent, you use a part of your investment and you invest that in community development programs, and then that is then seen as an equivalent. Elon Musk said that I will help hundreds of schools with internet access. I don't want to give away ownership, but I want to help schools. Coca-Cola just announced big investments also in the community development side. Microsoft, they at this stage have equity equivalence. But the problem at this stage is there's qualifying criteria, and you must argue that, and government will consider that. And the problem at this stage, there's no real regulations that regulate that. What we say is, and that is part of our discussions at this stage, our proposals for the South African government and the American government, is take away the criteria of the qualifications for equity equivalence. Like the simple way, it's not necessary to argue that you have automatic access to that specific programs. It's not necessary to give away ownership, and suddenly you have people that comes invest in South Africa and invest in community development programs. And I think that's important next phase. And I think we are moving towards that. We still don't think it's ideal. We think no interference of government in ownership, economy, or your company. We believe that, but this is an important phase towards final phasing out is equity equivalence.
So just to close off with, if I understand you correctly, what you would support and where you think it is going to be inevitable is that when companies from abroad invest in South Africa, because of our past and because of the need to uplift our society, they will have the opportunity to invest in the society to help build schools or community investment. They should not be forced to give away equity to a little group of people who are already obscenely rich and continue to just want more. Is that the way that I understand the crux of the argument that you and Solidarity have been putting forward?
That's the crux of the argument. And the current legislation makes provision for that. There must be certain regulation changes, and then it can be done. And it can be done very quickly. Within weeks, we can have a system where companies come in, invest in the country's development, and we take away that elite ownership, that enrichment element of that. And it can be done. And at this stage, we hope we can be successful. That's a hard push at this stage from our side. And that is our core proposal in resolving the asks of the Americans, specifically the ask on race legislation. And I think we get a very friendly ear from the Americans. And I think we even get a friendly ear from the South African government. We hope that one can push that through. The second vehicle, of course, that also take out the elite element is employee share ownership schemes. Employee share ownership schemes is also race neutral, and it take away the elite element. And of course, that is also an economic imperative because it align the workers with the strategic positioning of the company. So that's the second vehicle that one can use without giving away certain percentages of your company for a few elite.
So it just appears as though it is inevitable, but those who are benefiting from it, that handful, 100 or few hundred, are going to hold on for dear life and use whatever influence they've got.
They're going to hold on. But the pressure is so big at this stage through what I said, the three um, three places: international, the pain of the people, companies. And we see that through what I showed you, how companies at this stage starting just simply not to comply. And that is what Wayne Duveneck, through the e-tools, people just simply said, we're not going to comply. And if it comes to race issues, there's so many things that you can do to, not to imply. People go even further than the act requires. They self-imposed obligations that people put on themselves, and we say to companies, just stop that. One of the examples is race in advertisements. People use race in advertisements as if they are obliged to do that. That's a self imposed obligation. Take away race out of advertisements so that you can get the best people into your processes. There's also no obligation on you not to use merit if you appoint someone. So stop the self imposed obligations, hollow the system out by just do what you must do. I want to take a very simple example. Solidarity started with a platform, and on this specific platform, companies can register, and then they can put job advertisements on our platform. And but we have a condition: you can't put any race criteria in an advertisement on our platform. And we thought, we will do that. More than 4,000 companies in South Africa registered on Solidarity's platform. 14,000 jobs are now advertised on our platform, and none of those jobs have race criteria. So that actually is a way to hollow out the race system, because people want the best people. And the paradox at this stage, the majority people in South Africa with good skills are still black South Africans, because by far they are the majority of people in South Africa.
Dirk, you've mentioned a few times that this is inevitable. Well, in words of that type. How long do you think it'll take before normality, before we become a normal society here, where race is put onto the scrap heap?
It's so difficult. The United Nations, CERT, and the International Labour Organization, that's of course also agent of the United Nations, makes it very clear that any race programs must be temporary. They are very clear on that. We've entered into agreement with the South African government under auspices of the International Labour Organization, and that specific agreement was made in order of court. And in that agreement, we've agreed on the principle that it must be of a temporary nature. So that is in the first place. The principle of a temporary nature is acknowledged by the international world. I don't see that in South Africa, that there is going to be a specific end time, for the simple reason the enrichment and the corruption is are institutionalized, and that's the problem that we sit with. And so the institution will try to keep this as long as possible, so that they can be near to the planted pots. And that is the dilemma that we have. So what we must do as ordinary South Africans, and the majority of ordinary South Africans feel that race classification must not be part of any policy anymore in South Africa. That is how the ordinary South Africans feel. We must hollow it out. We must hollow it out through pressure, not self-imposed obligations, etc. This is not going to be a light switch that will be put off at overnight. It's going to be a long process. It's going to be a process of dimming the lights, and I see that process. That process already started, and Elon Musk, Donald Trump, ordinary South Africans, companies, etc., help to actually put more pressure on that. So it comes. I don't have a specific date.
So your recommendation to South African businesses who believe that the current structure of BEE is wrong would be, when they are asked to give a BEE certificate, is to refuse to do so?
Well, I don't say be illegal, but within the legal parameters, you can do a lot. You are not obliged to do to issue a certificate for every other company that asks for you. What we do that through that is we keep the system intact ourselves, and it's not necessary. We must see how we can put pressure on the system. I say within the legal parameters, and there's a lot of room through which you can do it.
Dr. Dirk Hermann, the Chief Executive of Solidarity, and I'm Alec Hogg from biznews.com.
Thank you.